Shalom and welcome everyone to the ICEJ webinar series. I'm David Parsons, welcoming you from our new TV studio here at the headquarters of the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. And we've got another exciting show for you today, Showdown at the Hague. While Israel is here fighting for its existence and future on several fronts, the nation of Israel is also fighting for its future in several legal cases that are now pending before the two major world courts in The Hague, the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. And we're going to have a gathering of Christians next week in The Hague to stand with Israel in these matters. It's not always easy to get to these justices and make your voice heard, but we're going to go there in faith and really try to have a showdown and a confrontation with the powers that be concerning our love and concern for Israel. And to help us understand these matters, we are so glad to welcome again our friend Andrew Tucker. Good to see you, Andrew.
Thank you, David.
Yes. Andrew is an international lawyer who specializes in Israel, in matters related to Israel and the Middle East. He's studied at law schools in Australia, the UK, and the Netherlands, where he lives now. And he's also taught in different law schools. He was the former executive director of Christians for Israel, a major pro-Israel Christian organization based out of Holland. And he is now the founder and director of Think, the Hague Initiative for International Cooperation, and co-author of the book Israel on Trial, published in 2018. So Andrew, we want to talk about actually 4 cases pending between the two courts in The Hague. And if you can help us sort of give a synopsis of it, there's the UN General Assembly request for advisory opinion, number 1. Help us with that.
Right. So at the end of 2022, the General Assembly, and like a lot of this, it's always a group of states, and I think in this case it was 87 member states adopted a resolution. Really, this was a Palestinian initiative. The Palestinians have been mobilizing the General Assembly over the last 2 decades, really, to push for recognition of Palestinian statehood, to bypass effectively the negotiation process. And they're looking for a kind of imprimatur from the UN of their Palestinian statehood. And this was a resolution asking the International Court of Justice, the ICEJ, for what's known as an advisory opinion. The ICJ really has 2 functions. It resolves conflicts between states when they consent to bring a case to the court. But it can also issue an advisory opinion. That's really just a kind of legal advice. It's non-binding. It's an advice to the General Assembly in this case. And the Assembly is asking, it's really asking questions they themselves already give the answer to. And they say, well, look, Israel's occupation of territory since 1967 is illegal. It's gone on for too long. It's preventing the Palestinians from having a state. So they want the court to really rubber stamp that view and to say that indeed the occupation is somehow illegal. Israel has no rights to be in Judea and Samaria or East Jerusalem or the Gaza Strip. And the Palestinians have a right to a state in that territory. That's the essence of their request. So that was the end of 222, so before October the 7th. But in my view, there's got to be a link between these 2 things. It's no coincidence. I think this is all happening around the same time. And over the past year, the court has received submissions from states and international organizations, and now we're all waiting for the court's answer. One day soon, the court will issue probably an advisory opinion. And the big question is, what's the court going to say? Are they going to really go along this line of thinking or not?
Yeah. I know that you were part of the Fiji legal team. Only states can submit amicus curiae, friend of the court briefs, and you were part of the legal team for Fiji to submit something. And we talked about that in an earlier webcast. But this is the initial action which has brought the Christians together in The Hague next week. But this was being planned before October 7, and now we've got several other things that are sort of ripening for adjudication all at the same time. We've got the petition by South Africa on the genocide treaty, whether Israel's violating it. Give us a little background on that, where it is.
Yeah, so as well known, South Africa suing Israel under the Genocide Convention, and there's a parallel case, Nicaragua suing Germany for helping Israel to commit genocide. We're still in the preliminary phase of those proceedings. South Africa's sought preliminary rulings from the court, and the court's basically said so far, look, we're not deciding that Israel is committing genocide here. We think South Africa has enough of a case to be before the court. But the court has refrained from ordering a ceasefire. It's refrained from really restricting Israel in any significant way in its campaign in Gaza against Hamas. And it has refused to make a determination at this point that Israel is committing genocide. Many people are misunderstanding about this. They think the court is saying that it's plausible that Israel is committing genocide. That's not what the court said. I think it's important to be clear about that. There's a lot of evidence that still needs to come before the court before it will ever make a decision on this genocide case. And this will take a long time.
Mm-hmm. I think there was one legal analysis on it that said everyone lost in the ruling that South Africa didn't get what they want. Israel didn't get what it wanted when about 3 months ago the court first ruled that it had jurisdiction to look at this, whether Israel was committing genocide. There was enough of a case to take jurisdiction over it. But then South Africa sought another injunctive relief to stop the Rafah operation, but Israel interpreted it that it wasn't a hard and fast order, that if they went about it patiently, the U.S. would help back them up if it ever got sent to the UN Security Council, and so far the Rafah operation has gone well.
Right. So look, this is all really a big PR stunt, in my view. The South Africa and the states around are using this proceedings to kind of generate this idea that Israel's committing genocide. You're quite right. The court hasn't prevented the Rafah operation. It made a kind of slightly ambiguous ruling that Israel can go into Rafah, but it just must make sure that it's not seeking to destroy the Palestinian people. It must comply with international law in doing so. So it kind of left the whole thing up in the open. And the problem, a part of the problem with all of this, David, is that the international legal rules are not entirely clear on some of these issues. And secondly, we're dealing with a very unique, complex situation in Gaza. It's highly intense urban warfare with hostages in tunnels deep underground that Hamas is using, and using human shields. And so the legal rules were not really equipped to deal with this kind of intense asymmetric warfare. And I think it's highly problematic when legal conclusions are drawn by people without having the facts without having gone through a significant legal analysis. The courts themselves are refraining so far from reaching final decisions or conclusions. So I don't think the media should be doing that either.
Yeah, it's a strange situation where a court is being asked to call the shots in the midst of a war. It's very odd, and they're not used to it.
No, well, that's right. The International Court of Justice, this is not the role of the International Court of Justice. This is the Genocide Convention also is being weaponized really here. And what the court is actually doing is being sucked into a kind of micromanagement of this complex war and using international humanitarian law. Mm-hmm. And that is not the court's jurisdiction. The court has no right whatsoever under the Genocide Convention to be imposing its view about humanitarian law. So I think the court here runs a real risk of going beyond its mandate.
Yeah, but it's got a lot of political appointees on it. There's a third action that not many people know about it. I know you've been keeping track of it, but it's the Palestinian Authority suing the United States over the move of its embassy to Jerusalem in 2018. Is there any sort of update? I know it's sort of related to the first action we talked about, this advisory opinion, whether the Judea-Samaria, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, whether Israel's an illegal occupier there.
Yeah, so that's right. When the U.S. moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, it's the state of Palestine which has brought proceedings. The PA itself has no standing before the court. So they're doing it under the name of the state of Palestine, suing the United States for moving its embassies, and it's all under a particular treaty, the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. And they're saying, well, you can only have an embassy on the territory of the receiving state. And by moving its embassy to West Jerusalem, they argue West Jerusalem does not belong to the state of Israel. Therefore, they have a dispute with the state of Israel. The United States has said this is a totally ridiculous claim. We don't recognize the existence of the state of Palestine. We don't have a dispute with the state of Palestine. So they've refused to even participate in the proceedings. And it's not going anywhere, and I'm not aware that the court is taking any action. So this is right down at the bottom of their priority list. But it's there. It's on the books. The Palestinian state is suing the United States, and one day this question will have to be resolved. But it's a crazy claim.
Yes.
It's a crazy claim because they're arguing that even West Jerusalem is not part of the state of Israel. So this goes to show just how wide the Palestinians' territorial claims are. They're not just limiting their claims to the so-called occupied territories. They're claiming that all of Palestine belongs to the Palestinians. And they've made this clear in all of the other proceedings as well. I think it's important to realize this, David, that at the end of the day, they dispute the legitimacy of a state of Israel on any part of Palestine.
Yeah, I think this whole fear we have of the world imposing a two-state solution upon Israel, they're going to have to impose it on the Palestinians as well. And they think they're doing the Palestinians a favor by giving them a little rump state, but they're not going to accept it. And this is part of the whole fallacy around the two-state solution right now. There's a fourth action, which is over in the International Criminal Court. This official probe started by the former chief prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, in collusion with the Palestinian Authority to probe possible war crimes being committed by Israel in the Palestinian areas. Since June 13, 2014, Karim Khan, the new chief prosecutor, has now issued arrest warrants in relation to the current war as part of that probe. Any sort of updates, anything we need to know about where that's going?
Yeah, so we're waiting now for the court itself to decide whether or not to issue the arrest warrants. The prosecutor has to ask the court to make that decision. I'm not aware of when this is likely to happen. I don't think the court's made that public yet. There's a lot of issues actually potentially which are being dealt with behind the scenes. The arrest warrants, Khan, the prosecutor, has issued or asked for the issue of arrest warrants against 4 people, 2 Hamas leaders and 2 Israeli leaders. The Israeli leaders are being accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity under the Rome Statute. And one of the main ones is this allegation that Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war to achieve the destruction of Hamas, get the hostages back, but also to collectively punish the Palestinians. That's the allegation. Now, I think to issue the arrest warrants, the court will have to make a decision that they think that the prosecutor has a good case, right? They're not going to issue warrants if they think it's totally ludicrous or unrealistic. So they have to form their own opinion about that. And they have to also decide that they have jurisdiction and that the case is admissible. And to be admissible, it means that Israel itself is not taking any action to investigate its own leaders.
Which they're doing.
With the principle of complementarity. Well, this is the question. I don't think Israel is investigating whether or not the prime minister is guilty of the war crime of starvation. But Israel is certainly investigating a whole lot of potential breaches of international law by the IDF, which just goes to show that Israel holds itself to the highest standards in terms of its ethical pursuit and compliance with international law. But this question of starvation, I think, is a very tricky one, and evidence is now coming out that it's highly questionable. There's a lot of talk about starvation, and there's no doubt that, or at least it seems to be no doubt that some people have died in Gaza through malnutrition. There is a problem in food supply, but it doesn't mean that it's Israel's fault that the food is not getting to the people of Gaza. And there's a lot of water that has to pass under the bridge before that can be proven. It's quite likely that it's Hamas itself which is preventing food from reaching the population in Gaza.
Yeah, we just have this new report, the headline, "No Famine in Gaza," by this, it's considered an objective, neutral, trustworthy organization that's affiliated with the UN. It's called the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification. They're experts who go around the world looking for famine conditions and sort of classifying where it is. And they got no dog in this fight. They're neutral between Israel and the Palestinians, no political agenda. And they've concluded there's no famine there. They issued a report in March that said over the next 3 or 4 months, up until July, they expected famine conditions in Gaza, and they said our assumptions were wrong. And I think the UN and all these officials, the UNRWA and all these other international agencies, they were all screaming famine, but this is a neutral, objective body that says no. It's both the International Court of Justice in the genocide case and these arrest warrants in the International Criminal Court were both based on these allegations, even by UN officials, that Israel was starving the Gazans. How important is it to get this new evidence in there?
Right. Well, extremely important, David. So it will definitely, on the genocide cases, Israel has a lot of opportunity to bring new material, new evidence to the court. It will have to be Israel that does that. As the proceedings go into the merit stage, there'll be further evidence which will be brought. And clearly, starvation is one of the main claims of South Africa, that this is the main tool being used, or one of the main tools to wipe out the Palestinian people is to starve them. The criminal court, I think, is even more problematic. The difficulty there is Israel is not a party to those proceedings. So when it comes to issuing arrest warrants, the court has to look at evidence that's produced by the prosecutor, and the prosecutor hasn't brought this new evidence. And it may be that the court is saying to the prosecutor, well, look, this new evidence is becoming public. You have to convince us that your allegation of starvation is a realistic one. So I think one way or another, it's going to be on the table. It will come before the court. And clearly, if and when Netanyahu and Gallant are charged with crimes, and there's a long way to go before that happens, then they will also bring in this kind of evidence to show that.
Normally in a criminal proceeding, a state prosecutor goes to a judge, an attorney general, and says, we want to issue an arrest warrant against someone. We have evidence they're doing this and that, and there's no one defending you there. You don't even know you're being considered for an arrest warrant. But as an officer of the court, the prosecutor has to tell the truth. You're actually under oath, aren't you? So this chief prosecutor would have to bring this evidence himself to have any legitimacy himself.
I think so. Oh, well, that's definitely the case. I mean, the prosecutor is under a very high responsibility to make sure that he's bringing an independent and verifiable case. And at the end of the day, he knows he has to, because the evidence will come before the court. And there's no point bringing a case which is based on flimsy evidence now, which is only going to fail later. So I think it was too early to be bringing these arrest warrant applications. There's not enough evidence. It's based largely on hearsay and on UN reports, which we know now are highly dubious. So I think the court will be extremely cautious. It's the court's reputation is at stake here. If it starts entering into cases which at the end of the day are just going to fail, this will be another nail in the court's coffin of legitimacy.
Yeah, the whole situation of the food supply, let's sort of clarify for the people. Israel, it's not obligated to feed the enemy, but it's been doing everything it can to get food in. It's just been trying to make sure Hamas does not get its hands on it and control it, and therefore maintain its control over the people. And there's been all sorts of looting and stealing of this food, even from UNRWA warehouses, by Hamas, by other armed groups, by people, and hoarding of this stuff, and the prices going up. So there's plenty of food in Gaza. It's just hard for everyone to get to it. And some people may be hungry from time to time, but it's not a deliberate policy of starvation by Israel. That's correct?
I believe that's right. I mean, the the idea that Israel is deliberately trying to kill the Palestinians by starving them and using that as a weapon of war is such an outrageous claim. In these circumstances, when there's so much evidence that Israel is, there's a debate about whether or not it should be, allowing more or less in. But this is a debate at the margins. It's not about the intention to starve the Palestinians. And I think this is the kind of blood libel, really, that, and I hesitate to use that word, but because I think the prosecutor, in a kind of naive way, is not ill-intentioned, but I think he's become captured by the UN system and the rhetoric around the allegations that Israel is just out there to kill the Palestinians, and the enormous political pressure that he's under to take action.
Yeah, I want to ask about Karim Khan. He's a British Muslim. Some were concerned about it. Others said, no, he's a good guy. But he's actually taken an aggressive stand since October 7, more and more aggressive in his actions against Israel. But there was an interview he did with the British media a couple weeks ago where, when he was defending his decision to issue arrest warrants against both Netanyahu and Gallant, and against I think it was 3 Palestinian leaders to do this. He got a lot of pushback from both sides and moral equivalency and all. And he did an interview where he said that Israel should treat what happened on October 7 and the threat of Hamas kind of like Britain did the IRA and the terrorism that, something would blow up in the financial district in London, or certain street clashes or bombings in Northern Ireland. But there's a huge difference between what Britain faced, a police action, and Israel facing off against an army with tens of thousands of rockets and tunnels, and also the threat of Hezbollah, much even larger, bigger militaries than most countries.
I think you're absolutely right, David. This is the strange thing about this whole situation, isn't it? That very few people seem to accept the idea that Israel is facing like a multi-front war. It's not just dealing with isolated acts of terror. It's not just dealing with a kind of radicalized extreme fringe group. It's not even just dealing with a kind of, a Palestinian resistance movement. Many will argue that, Hamas is just yes, they might use violence, but you could compare it to the ANC trying to get rid of the apartheid regime. It's a very different situation, because here Israel is facing, as you say, effectively armies that are trying to destroy the existence of the state of Israel. And at the end of the day, I think this is where Israel differs from most in the international community, who don't want to see that in fact, this is an existential war with Iran and Qatar and other states financing and mobilizing and facilitating all of this. Massive amounts of money being poured into the West Bank and into Gaza. And the question is, why do people not want to see that? They don't like to give credence to Israel's statements on this. They see it as kind of rhetoric. But at the end of the day, I think there's pretty clear that if Israel doesn't really take significant action to get rid of this massive network of tunnels and buildup of arms supplies, it's going to be faced with an all-out attack. And every state has the right to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, I think it's a very flawed analogy to compare it to what was basically a police action against the IRA, a much smaller terror militia. There's another evidentiary, excuse me?
So it's a very different conflict, isn't it?
Yes.
The IRA is not trying to destroy Great Britain. That was a conflict about, a political conflict about Northern Ireland. So completely different circumstances. And I think Karim Khan has allowed himself to go down a very slippery slope here, which I think is highly dangerous.
Yeah, there's one other evidentiary matter that I think you've been involved with in some way, and this is this whole allegation that Israel is deliberately killing women and children in Gaza during this conflict, that for months and months, the UN, based on Hamas, the run Ministry of Health in Gaza, was saying 70% of the casualties, these numbers are growing, 70% are women and children. And then your colleague, Greg Rose there Gregory Rose, he had a team in Australia that looked at the numbers. I think there was someone at the School of Economics at Wharton School in Philadelphia that looked at it, and they exposed that the numbers were being cooked. And then all of a sudden, to always make sure there was that 70% casualty rate among women and children, and all of a sudden the UN dropped almost 10,000 casualties from the rolls. And is this evidence going to make it into these two courts in The Hague? You say Israel has a way to do it in the Court of Justice in the genocide case from South Africa, but it's more difficult in the ICC.
Yeah, it's more difficult in the ICC at this point because it's really everything's in the prosecutor's hands and the court's hands until it would ever get to the point of a real prosecution, and then the Israeli leaders themselves can bring evidence before the court. But until then, it's up to the court and the prosecutor to admit evidence. And at this point, there's very little sign that they're willing to look at these new studies and independently assess the veracity of UN, let alone Hamas figures. It amazes me that people are still talking about these figures when even the UN agencies themselves, as you said, have questioned their own figures. And the media are really not talking about it very much either.
It got a little coverage, but it turns out the ratio of civilian deaths to combatant deaths on the Palestinian side in Gaza could be even less than 1-to-1, when the normal rate is about 9 civilians to every combatant in most similar urban asymmetric conflicts, which exactly. It just shows Israel's doing everything it can to reduce civilian casualties.
Yeah, that's right. And but this is all about the optics, isn't it? And this war is so much under the magnifying glass, much more than the campaigns against ISIS or in Afghanistan. We didn't see every day the horrific pictures, but as you said, civilians were being killed in much larger numbers proportionately in those conflicts than in this one. It's just that I think Hamas and the Palestinians are playing a very, very clever PR game. I think 7th of October was all about creating the images and the pictures and in drawing Israel into attacking Gaza, and they were going to use it to win this PR war, and I think they've done a very good job. But at the end of the day, I mean, the media is one thing, but really our governments have a huge responsibility here, I think, to take leadership, to question the evidence that's coming out, and to show, take positions, even if they're not involved legally in these proceedings, but to be standing in a place of independence. And I think that's lacking. But I think this is, what's going to happen in The Hague next week, and our work, I think, together is important, is to be informing political leaders, to be informing others in civil society, so that we can collectively raise more of a voice on these issues.
Yeah. You mentioned it early that this is all a campaign of lawfare by the Palestinian Authority against the existence of Israel. Been about 2 decades now, probably since the Durban Conference Against Racism, 2001, and that whole delegitimize and to disinvest from Israel, the 3Ds. But now it's like the Palestinian Authority does the lawfare funded by Western governments, while the Hamas, their division of labor is armed resistance, kill Jews to make them angry, to get them react. It's okay if we have a lot of casualties. These are necessary sacrifices, as a Hamas leader recently supposedly said. But it seems to be working, and how can we fight it better?
Well, it does seem to be working. I mean, at the end of the day, and let's not forget, this is a kind of Palestinian political leadership. I think most Arab non-Jewish inhabitants of Israel, but also in the occupied territories, many of them are probably at the end of the day simply want to lead peaceful lives. But there is always been, for 100 years, the political leadership of the Arab world and the Palestinians has been to deny the existence of the state of Israel. And I think these cases are no different. It's all about creating this paradigm, this narrative that Israel is an illegitimate colonialist imposition on Arab Palestinian territory. So I think that's the narrative we have to speak about and explain why it is legitimate for the Jewish people to have a national homeland in Palestine, and to explain that this national home is not intended to be an exercise in ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, but to be a place where Jews and non-Jews can co-inhabit this very small piece of territory. So I think that's the job we have to do, is to tell the historical truth. And it's a complicated one, because people like to have a black and white story, don't they? They like to just simplify it to simple sound bites. And the history of Israel and the history of the restoration of the Jewish people is not it's not as simple as that. But at the end of the day, it is about whether the Jews as a nation people have a right to a homeland. And I think both legally and historically and morally, they do. Pardon me.
And in the place where they now have that state, yes, in Eretz Israel.
Exactly.
Bless you.
That's right. And again, this is not to exclude the Arab people.
One last observation, question I'll pose.
Yes.
We sort of feel the Palestinians are winning this PR battle and taking Israel to the Hague and really winning in these things. But if you look at the Palestinian opinion polls, there's not much support for the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority has told their people, we're going to go get us a state. We're going to go and undermine Israel's legitimacy. And we think they're doing well. The Palestinians think that Hamas is doing much better. And most of the polls show more support for Hamas, though if you live in Gaza, it is dwindling. If you live in the West Bank, where you hear only from Al Jazeera, they think Hamas is winning, so they support is growing there. But overall, very little support for the Palestinian Authority. Most of the people think the PA has brought them nothing, and I think that's an interesting distinction from how we view all this.
It's hard to kind of know where all of this is heading. I think we have to kind of also dismantle this idea of the two-state solution. It's become a kind of, I think, a blockage in a way to considering real solutions. The whole idea that you simply divide the land into two separate independent states that are going to live successfully and peacefully side by side is a complete illusion. It hasn't worked for 100 years, and there's no reason why it's going to work today. The big question is what will work. And there's no other solution than some kind of coexistence. Certainly the Palestinians are going to need to have some kind of autonomy, which they do already. That's why the PA was created, to give them autonomy. But if they don't want that, if they choose for aggression and destruction of Israel, then I think they have to face the consequences. And that is conflict, that is war.
Yeah.
So I think first this war has to, unfortunately, come to a conclusion before we can, and even the people themselves can look at what the political solution is going to be. And now it's being turned around, isn't it? People are saying, no, well, now we need a political solution before the conflict is going to be ended. But there's nobody to carry that political solution. The Palestinians themselves, as you say, are choosing for extremism.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, going to be unacceptable to Israel.
Yeah, and I think this notion of a two-state solution, that it's something that the nations, it's groupthink around it. Just as Israel had groupthink around Hamas isn't going to attack us, and all the signs and intelligence reports that they would were ignored because everyone agreed with this consensus, and all the nations, as we said at the top, that they think it's the magic solution for everything, and let's just impose it on Israel. But they're going to have to impose it on the Palestinians as well, because they don't accept the existence of Israel. They want the whole land and not just a state in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and Gaza. All right, that's our time for now. I want to thank Andrew Tucker, our guest. We'll see you in Den Haag next week for this showdown in The Hague.
Yeah, looking forward to that, David. So there's two events that we're going to be involved in. One is a more policy event. We're going to speak with politicians, members of parliaments from European countries to talk about what's going on in the courts. And then there's a large event mainly for Christian leaders called The Trial, where Christians will come from lots and lots of different countries to raise a voice, to issue a statement or decree, and to raise this, the voice of the body of Christ, really, that God is bringing his people home, and that he is sovereign and Lord over the nations and over the territory of this world, and that we should be very careful. It's really a testimony to the court and to the whole world that we should act wisely and judiciously. I think that's an important voice that needs to be raised.
Yes, we look forward to being there with you to do that in these events next week in The Hague. And that's our time for now. We thank everyone for joining us here on the ICEJ webinar series. You can come back next week, Thursday, 3 p.m. We'll be coming to you from Jerusalem with another webinar. And of course, at the top of the hour, 4 p.m. every day, Israel time, you can join us for our daily global prayer gathering, praying with Christian leaders and Christians from all over the world for Israel and the region. That's our time for now. God bless you from Jerusalem.
Thank you for joining us for this informative webinar. Be sure to subscribe to our social media channels or visit our website at icej.org for upcoming webinars and more ICEJ exclusive content.